How can we, as a human race, as enlightened beings walking this planet, address child abuse and the corruption of children and the sacrifice of children on this planet?
This is a topic that requires much care in addressing. It requires much care and openness in receiving. The very subject itself triggers ingrained, inculcated, habituated patterns of consciousness. For the most part, on the human scale, these patterns have been quite rigidified. They have been formed and they have been maintained and they have been sustained as constructs of consciousness. And so the experience of the arrival of children and the early developmental years of children is hallmark and characteristic of every culture upon this planet, has always been. Therefore, anything substantial which occurs during the period of the early childhood development years has great impact and determinism for the trajectory of the evolution of that culture, that societal subsegment, and indeed for the grand cumulative morphogenic field of human consciousness. It is important to understand, therefore, that in addressing a question such as this, it is imperative to address it from what is known as spectral perspective, and that is the broad spectrum approach of consideration of what these different processes are, these different dynamics are, these impacts, these ramifications. It is not simplistic enough to simply interpose one's preconceived and pre-habituated constructs of morality onto a subject such as this. It is not sufficient to impose religiosity upon this. It is not sufficient to impose a universalist cosmology even of fairness and dignity. All of these are necessary, all of these are relevant, but they are not sufficient. You must elaborate a little bit more, a broader spectrum. This is an ironic transmission, of course. The question itself generally begs a moralistic approach to addressing, spiritual approach to addressing. All of that is necessary, and yes, it will be addressed. Yet it is also important to understand the cosmology and the cosmicity of such a process. Without the loss of spiritual, astral, and cosmic consciousness, which occurs in the early developmental stages of childhood, the physical reality that we operate in itself would collapse. One of the first things to understand is that prior to entering into the physical realm and departure and separation from the womb of the mother, we are dealing with the consciousness of an eternal being. A being that is beyond age. A stream of consciousness that has known much throughout the cosmos. A stream of consciousness which is coming here with a dharma and with karma. Just moments before, the consciousness was fluid in the field of awakenedness, in the field of cosmic understanding, in the spiritual and the astral planes. During the early stage of the incorporation, the incarnation into physical flesh envelope, there comes the contraction of this hyper-expanded state of consciousness. with such contraction also comes a deviation or a diminution of the continuity of awareness. As such, by the time this infant has attained the sealing of the soul body with the physical body, there is a small amount left of that infinite consciousness, or at very least the consciousness of the infinite. And yet there is still that small amount. Contained within it, so much value, so much power, so much innocence, which is the innocence that is at the precipice of the twist into ignorance. It is the innocence of awakeness, which then twists into the ignorance of entrapment into corporeality, into the material world. The transiting of that is what is so essential. This is called the moment of the fall from grace. This is called the moment of the loss of the innocence. That critical period wherein this soulic being comes to attain a separation from their source of light, their source of knowing, their source of truth, their source of journey, and finds themselves having to accede and to second their impeti for expansion into what is called normal behavior and acceptance of authority and acceptance of power and acceptance of rules, so that they can be a good little girl or a good little boy. This critical stage is one of the most deterministic phases, which establishes the continuity of the matrix of collective consciousness that sustains the formality and the formational construct of what we call this world. The physicality, materiality, corporeality of this realm is held together by collective consciousness, consensual reality. Without such consensual reality, there would be not the stability and the continuity, even of these things that we call things, even of this physical world that we understand to be. This does not exist with complete integrity and continuity by its own. It exists in intelligent awareness with the biologics and the other sentient beings that constitute this field. There comes to be a consensual understanding of reality and the laws of formation and the laws of flow. So what we see then in the early developmental stages of this spirit being, this being who enters into this field from higher layers and higher strata of cosmic form flow, the disruption of continuity from source path into incorporation, the disruption of continuity of awareness and memory, is what helps establish the accession and the sustainment of the consensus reality that holds formation of physicality. This is how important it is. We all begin in some form called a child. Our consciousness expanded, becomes coalesced. Our essence, beyond formless, into formless, into form, becomes condensed. Our soulic essence becomes united as multiple streams, condensed and intertwined into a soulic strand, a soulic braid, a cord. This becomes then the logos of localized consciousness of a being. And contained within such are reasons, identity and reasons, purpose for existence, for living. Contained within that is a knowing, an akashic knowing, a deterministic trajectory for what is to be the nature of the journey of this being through that which is called life. As such, this also entails challenges, difficulties, what may be known as great tragedies and great sacrifices, what may be known as the most horrific of horrifics, what may be known as the greatest of abuses. From a simplistic, localized, moralistic framework, this unto itself is overwhelming to the heart and to the psyche. To consider the innocents who can be so abused. This is not to be diminished. This is to be understood as it is to be felt. It is to be addressed with the heart opening more and more and more, not less and less. It is not to be taken in so that you yourself can indulge in your own suffering of pity. It is not to be taken in so that you can counter with an indulgence and an immersion into hate. A desire for revenge, a desire yourself to violate numerous cosmic laws of existence. On behalf in your nobility response of the innocent children. Know this. For as heinous and as tragic as these occurrences are, the abuses of children, it is not for you to respond with hatred of your own. It is not for you to respond with a desire to kill, to maim, to wreak punishment and harshness and suffering upon those who themselves have violated numerous cosmic laws in the committing of these acts. Instead, it is important for you to expand, that you will allow yourself to see, to feel, and to know the greater karmic density of such interactions, their ramifications, their consequences. In your expansion, you would be able to see the areas of atonement which are potentially available to you should you continue in your expansion into mastery. Guidance is important. Compassion is important. Infinite love is important. Intervention is important. Yet will you consider yourself noble by virtue of the amount of hatred you can generate within your consciousness in response to that which you see as abusive and unfair? It is easy to want to kill, to want to punish, to want to torture, to indulge and immerse yourself in hatred when you are witnessing acts that bring about the suffering of others, when you are witnessing acts which may come in the context of interpretation and application of your spirituality, your religiosity, your formalities of politics and philosophies. Understood. Not sufficient. The more that you do so, the more that you allow yourself to collapse and contract into hatred and desire for revenge and retribution and punition, the more you yourselves are duped and manipulated by those who are the greatest indulgers in such transgressions. Your very leaders, your very religious and spiritual leaders, your political leaders, your business and financial leaders, your moral preachers. These are your greatest hypocrites. These are the ones who institutionalize child abuse. These are the ones who indulge in the perversions, especially the sacrifices, the abductions, the cannibalistic behaviors on behalf of satanic rituals. The political machinations to bring about greater hardships upon the innocents of this planet. So if you wish to hate and you thrive on such hatred, you will find yourself even more so manipulated by those who can work behind the scenes and who can mobilize resources to indulge their consciousness. Thus the irony. You wish to see an end to such heinous activities, and you must open your heart. Creating your moral police forces, proclaiming how much you are enraged and full of hate, how much you want to kill all the perpetrators on behalf of the innocent children. And you yourself are infusing more of such venom into the field. As you induce so, you induce the entree into this field of more soulic beings who come for the sake of addressing the karma of such hated infusion. And they themselves come often as grand atoners for the field which has become so infused with hatred. So from a karmic dynamic, the more that you indulge with such responses, the more you are also, as they say, greasing the skids. You are making it more possible for even more children to come into this realm. They don't come as children. They come as evolved beings. And they come into this realm with a knowing that there is a difficult, difficult road ahead. You come into this realm knowing in advance, akashically, karmically, deterministically, the great travails that lie ahead in what will be the lifetime that they have chosen and been assigned as well to enter into. You may have already turned off. You may have already projected your hatred onto this one because you have yet to receive such a moralistic, simplistic, reductionistic diatribe against any who would indulge in such behaviors. It is simply requested that you hang in there just a little bit longer as we go into the next aspect of understanding of these processes that we can refer to collectively as child abuse. For those who would rail so fervently against what appear to be the attacks upon the innocent, then here is a question. Why would you so fervently wave your flag on behalf of dropping explosives and decimating such innocents, children, their mothers, their grandparents, by the hundreds of thousands and by the millions? You would wave your flag of patriotism, that you undertake your genocidal campaigns in your wars, your political machinations, your greed. But you would not flinch. You would not flinch when you destroy on that scale in the name of your patriotism. How hypocritical are you? It is no longer acceptable, humans, for you to banter about in your patriotic camouflage, to violate cosmic laws, to incur through your grand hypocrisies. What are the karmic inducements for those to descend into this realm, who through such dissension offer themselves as objects of abuse, and through such may gain attention and called upon you a level of response that brings you back somewhat to a semblance of realization, of compassion. When these young ones in their young form, ancient, timeless in their spiritual mode, come and find themselves entrapped in your physical world, and they are the objects of such violence, such neglect. They are also here in response to the hatred and the greed, the selfishness, the separation, the constructs of superiority and entitlement that you have created and sustained within your own fields of concern. Therefore, the more that you respond with your hatred and your desire to go out and kill, from your moralistic high ground of how dare they do this to the innocent children, examine yourself. Examine your politics. Examine your culture. Examine how you would so righteously allow the violations of the great commandments, the violations of the great laws, in the name of protecting your sovereignty, your security, your borders, your economic system, your political system, your God, you are invited to review that. Review that. And recognize that should you seek to be part of the healing, the solutions of such transgressions as are evident in what we are witnessing more and more and more, these ways and these processes of abuse of children. If upon such examination you see the solution one is the solution to all, that is for you to open your heart more. Open your heart to infinite love. And if it is infinite love, then it must be unconditional love. And if it is unconditional love, then it must be infinite. And therefore no one, no thing, no time is excluded from such love. And thus is it important for you to begin that journey of self-healing, where you feel yourself, you see yourself, you know yourself to fall into hatred, to fall into desire to inflict pain and suffering upon others, even if it appears to be from righteous impetus, and as such, a righteous response to injustice. This is a response to a question that even still is only partial. It is to address some of these other areas of concern, other areas of dynamics in the field. Many of the other areas, there are already consensual opinions which abound throughout this land, throughout this realm, regarding the inappropriateness of such actions of humanity onto itself. There is the emerging realization of the inconsistencies of humanity treating humanity and yet holding different standards for the treatment of other members of the biologic field. The abuse upon other animals, the consuming of other animals, the atrocities within that process, the harm, the disregard, the abuse of our environment overall. We're beginning to see that this compassion is expanding. And yes, we've seen more and more the inconsistencies of how we may hold ourselves to certain qualities and certain levels and certain standards of behavior, and yet violate those in our treatments of other species and other members of this biosphere. And so yes, there is a movement, there is a growing to have greater compassion across all of our world. And this must continue. It is also important to recognize that as the compassion within these local realms, within the material realms, expands, so does it also make it possible for a greater awareness to survive and sustain through the transiting from the cosmic, through the astral, through the spiritual, and into this corporeal realm, such that there is more awakening then allows the greater karmic address to take place, the greater lessons to be learned, and thus there would be the change of behavior within this realm. For there would be an emergent mastery to know that it is gradually no longer necessary for such great sacrifices by beings of such love to come into this realm and incorporate and subject themselves to these abuses. For these are indeed great sacrifices to ennoble the field of consciousness with greater compassion, greater mercy, and greater love. We would then be able to look upon the collective consciousness of this realm, and we would see and we would say, indeed, there is growth. There is evolution of consciousness. The barbarity of before has yielded to the great sea of love and compassion. This is what we seek. And yes, there have been always those who have come and have laid down to receive the abuses. Unfortunately, and fortunately, the vast majority of them have not known why they have come for such, why they would be subjected to such atrocities. And yet, the more that we collectively maintain the openness of our heart centers, maintain the continuous flow of this infinite love, the more these occurrences spark greater awareness and awakening rather than contraction, then the more such great sacrifices are benefiting many, many other realms beyond this one. For this realm is always under observation. It is under observation and study by beings and systems of organization far beyond this realm itself. These angelic beings who come and subject themselves, find themselves the victims of such grand abuses and atrocities. They are known, and their journeys and their missions are also appreciated across many, many dimensions and realms and universes. And so this is a lessening that resonates throughout the cosmos. And the more that humans engage in the openings of the heart space and the flow of the infinite love and compassion, the more indeed do humans also awaken to this realization. And as such, the journey of such children is known as a cosmic and divine mission that serves the greater flow of awakening to the infinite love of all the cosmos. Tragic as it is, and yet itself so catalytic and so important in assisting the ultimate realization and evolution of all. I hope this is useful.